Okay, so let's talk about foliage. Foliage is a very particular type of shader that's used within props and environment assets, mostly like grass, plants, vines, leaves for trees, uh, various different things. It's becoming more and more of a uh, pushed out subject where artists are now being hired just for their work with foliage. You might actually see foliage artists or plant artists or biome artists. They're trying to, it's becoming a new, more fleshed out type of shader effect. Whether you're just creating a simple foliage grass that's just going to lay it on the floor, or dynamic ones that can be moved with certain props or caught on fire or any other special effect, foliage is becoming more of a robust and defined system. Today, I'm going to show you guys the basics of some foliage assets. Mostly, I'm going to show you guys grass, but I'm going to show you guys some basic topics to point out and how you would set up implementing foliage. So here I already have a couple assets I've downloaded from Megascans. I will provide the links to them. But it is this type of just simple blade of grass. It's bunched up into these like little twigs, like how blades of grass naturally are. In some cases, you actually see artists who actually will create a different type of one where they don't create it like this, where it forks off from a single point. It's usually blades of grass that kind of come out in different directions. This is more of a realistic way of approaching grass. So I have this as the albedo with the alpha mask for this guy already set up. When you download it from Megascans, this is usually how a lot of their assets might come in. If not, it might be a opacity mask. But I've already gone ahead and made sure that the alpha is in here. There's also a normal map, ORM texture, and then this it's called translucency. And what this node is, it's for the subsurface values for this particular type of grass. You can see here it's very similar to the actual albedo, but it darkens this center area because naturally speaking, with grass, these centerpieces normally don't have the type of plant cellular basis that allows light to transmit through. Normally, plants like this would have grass coming through these like blades of grass, or if like it's a flower, it comes through the petals, but not through like the stem or the bulb of the flower. Um, so when we plug this in, you won't see any type of light coming through the center area, but mostly through these blades of grass. And then I've also downloaded one of the versions. You can download how they set up their foliages. Um, it's a bunch of these like flat cards that are placed randomly, and they've cut them out so that we won't experience a performance issue known as quad overdraw. Naturally speaking, when you bring this in, before how people used to make it is they used to throw these like pieces of like mesh together as like big quads and then have all this empty space like from the top area. They've cut these out so you don't have that problem. And one other thing I've already gone and done in is this is for when we apply motion to our grass. So I've gone ahead into Maya and I've actually applied vertex color to our mesh. So if you are, I don't, I'm very good with Maya. I'm not so good with Max or Blender, but there should be like a vertex painting type of tool. Here in Maya, it's up here in the mesh display settings, and you go to paint vertex tool and then just break it out here. So I'll select my mesh and then double click on the vertex tool. And then what I usually do is I'll go to like this front view, and then I'll go to select some vertices. And sometimes when you do that, it doesn't. Um, I'll usually select the whole thing first, and then I will go and select my color value, which you can do your RGB ones, just like what we were doing with vertex painting. And then what I'll do is I'll have all these selected. I'll paint it. I'll flood it so it's all white. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select a couple of these like mid values, not the top ones, but the bottom ones. And then I'm gonna change it back to black and then flood. And then by default, Maya already kind of smooths out some of these edges a bit, so it's not a harsh contrast. And then I'll just export this as an FBX. And then what I'll do is when I bring in this mesh, I'm going to go into down here into the settings. Normally, if this is something you just bringing in for the first time, you'll get import settings. At the top of the import settings, there's going to be a option for vertex color import option. Naturally, I believe it's ignore as the default one. What ignore does is it imports it, but it doesn't take in the vertex color that's already saved in the FBX file. I have it set to replace. So what this does is when you import this mesh in, it brings in the vertex color. So if I go up here to vertex color, I can see my vertex color showing on all these guys. And we're definitely going to need that for when we bring in wind effects for this guy. Otherwise, you're going to have everything move around and flicker, and you don't want to have that, especially for these lower pieces. They don't flicker as much. It's only these top areas since there's more open to the air. So how we're going to start this off is I'm going to go into our materials area, and I'm going to grab the base material, and I'm just going to duplicate it. I'm going to rename this to Foliage because the Foliage shader is going to be set up similar to our normal base prop shader. I'm just going to take out a bunch of things that we don't necessarily need. Like I'm going to take out the albedo adjustment. I'm going to take out our mask, our albedo tint, all these things. I don't need our tiling since foliage usually is a one-off type of asset. And I'm going to take out our metal value because we don't need that either. Another thing to note also is you want to make sure you turn off ambient occlusion. Naturally speaking, foliage usually is ambient occlusion usually is never applied to the grass itself. I mean, you could do it if it's a tileable world material, but for foliage assets like this, you don't want to have ambient occlusion on there because you'll get shading issues because it's a technically a one-sided mesh asset, and you normally want ambient occlusion to be generated in the level. So we've already kind of cleaned out everything. One of the first things you want to do is go in here and you want to change your blending option to masked so that we can get our opacity mask. And then usually what people used to do is they would either do the mask with the default lit, or they would go into subsurface. But Unreal Engine has already created this new one known as two-sided foliage. This is their way of handling a shading model for foliage right off the bat, where it turns on two-sided. It gives you everything that you need, and it also gives you some extra things like subsurface color, world position offset, and then opacity if you want to change some values so that maybe you want to make some adjustments of how like light is transmits through. You can go about making some of these adjustments. So let's go in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a special type of node. Even though it's named in a very weird way, it works with this no matter what, even if it's not a speed tree asset. So if you like right click and you type in like speed tree, you'll get a bunch of these different types of nodes that work with like speed tree assets. So what we're going to do is we're going to do color variation. So what this is going to do is when you bring this guy in, actually I don't need that. When you bring him in, it's going to randomize each node. Actually, you can actually go in here since it's a material function. So what it's doing is per instance of this object, it's going to randomize a certain color based off of the object's position with a random value of a type of like noise. You'll notice that it's going to give you a bunch of random crazy colors if you put the strength too strong. But in our case, we're not going to do that. So let me convert this parameter to color variation. And let's group him with the adjustments. And essentially speaking, this is the only thing you really need to do with your foliage. I'm going to do one other thing is I'm going to bring in another node, and this is going to be for our translucency. And the cool thing with translucency is there's nothing, or let me spell that, sorry. Loose N C. I hope I got that right. Translucency. Yes. Bringing that with the textures. Nothing really changes because translucency is just going to be a color map that we're going to have. It's not like it's not like any of these other special ones like normal or ORM. So we'll go here and then we'll make a small adjustment with a parameter so we can either lighten or darken it. And then this one will be our color translucency. You'd also call this like subsurface color, or you can even do transmission. Um, and then what you'll do is you'll plug this guy into your subsurface color. What this is going to do is it's going to apply extra color to our foliage. Naturally speaking, if you don't have this turned on, your foliage might have a very dark backside because it's not taking in subsurface color from here. So it's going to look like a normal asset that has like a dark side, and grass naturally doesn't do that because it absorbs more light and proceeds to bounce it through on its other side. So you won't actually have that kind of dark back that you normally would get these with these kinds of assets. And then I believe that should be naturally for all of these guys. There's nothing else to change. The one last thing that we need to do is we're going to want to add a little bit of effect for this grass. We don't want it just to be stagnant. We want to have some kind of dynamic effect to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually bring in another node, and we're going to type in simple grass wind. There are a couple other wind assets to use, like flipbook wind. There's a wind actual node, but this is mostly used for if you're using, I believe, actual wind dynamics. And then the other one is the wind for speed tree, which if you have speed tree assets, naturally speaking, they'll have built-in data. Since speed tree creates their own specific like speed asset, like for their trees, they'll have that stuff integrated in so you can actually apply that through there. So this guy, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a couple parameter vectors. This guy, what we're going to do is we're going to plug this into our WPO. And what this will do is it just applies this to a simple direction. And we want it to just be, I believe if you just set this to one here or one here, you can apply your wind direction in any different direction. You don't want to put, of course, in here, but it needs like a vector because it's like a physical direction. So the next one we're going to do is we're going to convert this guy and bring in for wind intensity. And this, of course, is just going to adjust how much wind is going to move our asset. And then we have our wind weight. And then our last one is our wind speed. I'm going to show you guys in a second how they all work. So we're going to plug that last one in. And they're all scalars. The last thing what we're going to do is we need to now bring in a vertex color node, because like we did before, we've applied that vertex color to our mesh. We're going to mask out the area that we want to have moving. So we're just going to bring in an empty scalar. We're not going to add any parameter to it. It's just going to be black. And then we're going to apply a lerp. We're going to plug in this to the white slot and then this to the black slot of the lerp. And then we're going to plug in our color, because it's going to look for all the color that's being used. If you are using green, apply green. If you're using red, apply red. We don't have to do any of that. It's going to be a black or white thing. So it's going to look for all the white. And since we have white on the top, it's going to just move that top area and not the bottom. And then we're just going to plug this guy all the way down here to world position offset. And what this does is it moves vertices along world space in a material. So we'll hit save and apply. And then let me go and create an instance. We'll just name this grass IMAT. Now let's start plugging in our textures. We have our albedo. We have our normal. We have our ORM, and then we have our translucency. Hit save. And then we'll just grab this guy. And let me just type in grass IMAT. You see something. Oh, I think I did not set one thing though. Oh, I did not plug in our alpha for albedo. So let's plug that into our opacity mask. Otherwise, how is it going to tell where the grass ends and the others begin? So let's hit save, and there we go. Now we have our grass, but as you can see, it looks like our two-sided is not working either. So I guess I need to also turn on this guy. Okay, let's hit save. Okay, there we go. Now we have our grass. You can see, of course, it looks a little dark on this end because this is where the shadows are casting. So let's go. I'm going to break out this guy so that we can take a look at our grass, but also look at our values. So I'm going to go in normal strength. You don't really have to do too much with people. What they say is you can apply, it's good to apply a little bit of extra normal since it's such a small asset. It's good to do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply some color translucency because you can see how dark it is. When you start applying a lot of grass, it's going to look very, very dark. So let's apply like 0.25 of it. And you can see that it's actually brightening up. It's going to brighten up a little bit more on here, but it's also going to brighten up this back area. And you're going to notice that like these lower areas, like these stems are not going to change. So like 0.5, it's only the grass that's going to be updated. Let's bring it to 1. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now let's bring in our wind intensity. Let's do 0.1. And of course, nothing's going right now because we need to start applying weight to it. Let's see, like a 0.5. And it also has this weird thing where sometimes it doesn't show in here because of the previewing, because it's not running technically in real time. Like you can hit real time on here, but it doesn't really toggle anything. It's only when you start applying it in the level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to paint some of this foliage first. So your easiest way to apply foliage is not, unless you're doing hand placing for whatever reason, you can actually go here to our modes and go to foliage. And this is not just for foliage, but you can do like rocks or even trees. This is just a mesh painting tool where it actually places meshes along surfaces. So I have this rock in here. I'm going to show you guys the do's and don'ts, which basically means don't paint on the rock. Try and paint around the rock, or else you're going to have grass on top of it. So when you bring it in here, you're of course going to get a couple of settings when you select this guy. So this is the density. So when you start painting, this tells you how much density of grass you want. So I'm going to do 1400 because I want a lot of grass. Here you can actually adjust things like scaling, which I want to keep everything uniform, but you can actually do locking on certain directions. I want it uniform, so I want all the scale to be exactly the same on all 3 directions, but I do want it to be a little shorter and a little longer. So what it's going to do is it's going to randomly apply these 2 scale values randomly to assets when you bring them in. You can even do the same thing with offsetting or even with rotation as well. And then you can do turn on some things like dynamic indirect lighting, distance field lighting, light map resolution if you're going to bake some things. You can even tell it to turn on, I'm going to tell it to cast shadows for 2-sided. So it's going to actually make sure that it does cast shadow for both sides. You can actually have it receive decals. You can set it as an occluder so that it can actually being able to use debuffer decals, though you might have an issue with it because it's trying to apply this the translucency information that comes with decal projections. So be very wary of if you're using decals with this. Try to use it as sparingly as you can. And then everything else is just normal stuff. You can even bring in virtual textures if you want to as well. So now that we have our guy in here, let's go up to our paint, similar to like the painting in vertex mode. And then you're going to get your cursor. Mine might be a little big, so you can actually go here and adjust it. And then you can adjust like your density, erase, different things. You can even place single instances of foliage, or you can select single instances of foliage, or even lasso a couple of them. But we're going to start painting, and it's going to take a little bit to think because we're bringing grass for the first time. Trying to go around because if you do this, it paints on top of it, and you don't want that unless you're painting like you can paint like little moss or something on here. Add a little extra if you have like a moss shader. Trying to paint around. And of course, like because of how we're like randomly dense painting it, you're gonna get holes, which naturally speaking, you'll just have a texture on the ground underneath. But we naturally now have some grass on here. And then maybe you want to do some things like let me go back to a normal mode. Let's, maybe adjust our light. Maybe our light might be a little too strong. And you can see when I adjust the light that you can see that there is light coming through, but you can see how bright that um, subsurface translucency is actually applying light to this absorption thing. So we can do like 0.75 or even like a zero point 0.5 and darken it just a little bit so it's getting some shadows on here. So you actually notice here, like if I turn this off, you can see how dark it is, and then when I rotate around, you can see how bright it is. That's that two-sided non-translucency effect coming in, which maybe we don't want that. So this helps with fixing that, but you got to make sure you pay attention to like how this pop goes, or else it's going to look really weird. Another way to fix that is, maybe if you're doing a stylized game, turn unlit off or set it to unlit instead of two-sided foliage, and that solves that. So we don't have that much of a pop with this guy. You're gonna get some, but it still looks good. And then that other one I was telling you about, this color variation. When I start adjusting the slider, you can actually see it's bringing colors, but it's random colors. So you'll notice we're getting some whites and some reds. This is a very subtle effect. You don't want to have too much of it. So like 0.05 helps, like maybe even 0.1. That helps out a lot. So it brings some whites or some other dark colors in here. Kind of breaks it up a bit besides our height values being adjusted too. And then let's bring in some wind speed. So now you can see that our grass is moving just a little bit. And if you actually look, you can see that it's moving, but if we look down here, it's not moving. And that's because we have our vertex color painted in. So you can even go up here and adjust like your wind intensity. Like maybe you want it to really start kind of flowing through, like it's a very windy day. And then you can do things like your wind weight so that it's really, really affecting things. Like maybe you want to, that might be a little too harsh. That's like a weird hurricane. Because remember, what it's doing is it's applying this type of like random noise generation to the wind. So that's kind of creating this effect. So be very aware of how everything kind of weighs down a bit. Maybe like a 0.2 or like a 0.3. That way, like it looks like it's coming through, and then like if you want to, you can see how it's like it's going this way. If you go back in, you can even promote this guy. We'll do wind direction. And then now we have our wind direction. Now we can do here. Let's turn him off. Be very wary of how you offset some of these guys. You could be pulling from one side or the other side. It's best just to apply just one direction to this. And let me actually do some. Sorry, that color is kind of coming out a little too strong on here. There we go. Put some wind speed on here. That might be a little too strong. 0.75 or 0.75. There we go. Yeah, so now we have some grass on here. And of course, if you want to, you can go into mega scans, you can go into the foliage editor, you can bring in some more. Actually, so like if you actually bring in some more, you can even turn certain ones on and off, or if you wanted to randomly sparse your foliage in, here and there, bring in like two more, and then it's will so long as one of these is checked, it will start bringing in them in randomly. So you can bring in some like tall grass or some flowers or something, and then maybe you don't want it and you just want to start painting in like rocks or something. You can just uncheck it and then it won't paint anymore. So, like I said, if you want to, you can even go in here and select one single group of it, or even like lasso a certain amount, and then you can move them around maybe. So it's very easy to control this stuff and make some adjustments here and there. Like maybe if you like look closely here, you can see that maybe some of the stuff might be like cutting into the rock a bit, and you want to change that. You can do that by all means. But this is essentially what the a basic foliage shader works with. You know, the two-sided effect, the translucency with the subsurface color, and then the basics of normal. You can even go further and like apply another normal direction for like if it's like rolling wheat or something, or you can take this and you can make certain effects where maybe after like a certain touch or something, you can make the grass like burn or something. Just many different things you can come up with for this guy. You can do stylized grass where maybe it only affects one side, or you can do there's a multitude of ways to handle things with it. And the cool thing is, since we're doing this foliage painting mode, it's all instance, so it kind of is bunching this all together, and it's not trying to present it like placing like one of these like static mesh rocks or static mesh anything. If you actually look in your here in your optimization views to shader complexity, you can actually see that it is a little dark here. It's not as like, bright as the sky or this rock, but it's not red, which is good. You don't want to have foliage be like this. I mean, maybe if you start painting more of it, like instead of it just being on this little thing, maybe there's rolling hills and hills and hills of it. But things you can control with it in the foliage painting mode is in the settings. You can even choose how far you can cull the distance for them. So you can set a minimum and maximum for culling. So by default, you can set it to 1, or you can say like after 60 units or 75, or even just maybe you want it to be like this. But in a lot of cases, maybe you don't want that much. What you can do is like say go to do 100 for your density, and then let's remove it all again. So let's go about erasing everything, because maybe you can't have all that grass or for whatever reason. So let's go in here. I set the density back to 1. So now we're going to just do some painting. And now it's going to paint some like simple, like not as dense grass. In a lot of games that can't have this much performance, they'll throw grass like this, like little bits here and there with some grass textures. Just be very aware that you might have that pop like that. So maybe don't create a mesh that is so big. Maybe try and do smaller, singular pieces of grass. But with this is essentially a foliage shader to a T with a bit of wind direction set up.